Hey everyone, and welcome back. That was the solo to Rock Bottom from 70s British hard rock band UFO with Michael Schenker on the strings, coming in as my number 41 greatest underrated, underappreciated, and or unknown guitar solo of all time. Underappreciated? You betcha. Unknown? To some degree, but I would be very hard-pressed to call Michael Schenker underrated. But then again, this solo in particular was a no-show on Guitar World Magazine's Top 100 Solos of all time, and it's probably his most famous. It is not a stretch to say that Michael Schenker was one of the most influential hard rock and heavy metal guitarists to come out of the 70s. The list of guitarists who cite Michael Schenker as a heavy influence are endless, and include the likes of Randy Rhoads, Kirk Hammett, Dimebag Darrell Abbott, Dave Mustaine, Alex Skolnick, Slash, Adrian Smith of Iron Maiden, Mike McCready of Pearl Jam, John Petrucci, Marty Friedman, George Lynch, Paul Gilbert. The list is just endless. A virtual who's who of rock and metal's greatest guitarists of the past 40 years or so, and much of it began with Michael Schenker, and much of that began with this solo that he performed while he was still high school aged. Not that Michael Schenker spent much time in high school. He was so good at an early age that by the time he was 16 years old, he was already touring and recording with the German band The Scorpions. It was while on tour with The Scorpions in England back in 73 or 74 that he caught the eye of Phil Mogg, the lead singer of British band UFO. Now, Phil needed a new lead guitarist and offered this young phenom the job, and Schenker accepted. Within a year, they had produced their first collaborative effort together, 1974's album Phenomena, the album from which Rock Bottom stems. Now, when I call Michael Schenker and by association UFO underrated and underappreciated, what I mean by that is throughout the 70s and well into the 80s and beyond, UFO with Schenker and Schenker going forward on his own without UFO were massively popular and huge draws in Europe and other parts of the world, but barely made a dent in the North American market. However, if you were a guitar player growing up in the late 70s and early 80s in North America, like I was in Canada, you of course knew who Michael Schenker was. Despite his music and albums, both solo and with UFO and the Scorpions, not making much of a dent in the North American market, like I said, Love Drive by the Scorpions did okay at the time, but that's the exception. His incredible talent as a hard rock metal guitarist and soloist was impossible to ignore if you were a young, aspiring guitarist yourself at the time. His name was pretty much everywhere in guitar circles back in the late 70s, 80s, despite his music not being particularly in the mainstream, especially in North America. He had quite an interesting career arc, to say the least, right from the beginning. You know, in every genre of music and on every type of instrument, there are child prodigies, not excluding hard rock guitar. Schenker most definitely fits the bill as a child prodigy. He played his first gig with the Scorpions when he was just 11 years old, recorded his first album with the band at age 16, and joined UFO as their lead guitarist at the age of 17, and immediately made a name for himself as a guitar force to be reckoned with while he was still a teenager. Throughout the 70s and 80s, he would bounce between revolving stints with his first band, The Scorpions, UFO, his own band, MSG, Michael Schenker Group, and another collaboration, the Macaulay Schenker Group. Now, despite his immense guitar skills, he was apparently a rather volatile and difficult individual to work with within a group environment, such as a band. Alcohol apparently played a large part in this, and it was somewhat common at the time for Schenker to just walk off stage mid-song and mid-concert not to return until the following night, whereas his bandmates feared he just might do the exact same thing again the next night. He later admitted to suffering from debilitating stage fright his whole life, so that may have definitely played a large part in his apparent bad on-stage behavior. Another time in 1979, Schenker even auditioned for Aerosmith after Joe Perry left the band, a gig that he would have most likely would have gotten. But Aerosmith producer Gary Lyons made several Nazi jokes aimed at Schenker's heritage, and Schenker stormed out of the room, again, never to return. I don't blame him for that one, however. He was also Ozzy Osbourne's #1 pick and #1 choice to replace Randy Rhoads after Randy died. As the German guitarist and his iconic Flying V were a huge influence on Randy Rhoads himself. However, Ozzy Osbourne claims Schenker made an absolute laundry list of outlandish demands were he to join the group, including his own private jet. Schenker himself, in his defense, admitted as such, but claims that it wasn't ego that drove his demands. He claimed that he didn't really want to join Ozzy in the first place, so he made so many outlandish requests that Ozzy would pretty much have to say no. Ozzy, of course, said no. The remainder of his career throughout the 80s, 90s, and beyond, and still, was a mix of stints with his own band, numerous reunions with UFO and the Scorpions, even a stint with American band Rat in 1990. Interesting guy, for sure, and an interesting life in the music industry. Still going strong these days at 66 years old, still recording and touring, looks amazing for his age as well. Anyway, the solo to Rock Bottom, just amazing that someone could pull off a solo like this back in 1974 at the age of 17 or 18 years old. It is without doubt one of the best long guitar solos in the history of rock and roll. The fact that Michael at such a young age manages to say so much and it never turns into a wank fest like a large percentage of other long guitar solos. It's really an accomplishment. Remember now, this is 1974. While not on the same technical level of many of the players that he would go on to influence in the 80s and beyond with solos such as this, there were still very, very few players playing at this level at the time, especially in hard rock and early metal. That's what's important here. Ritchie Blackmore, maybe being one of his contemporaries that matched him. It's just the way that this solo builds and continues to build throughout its 2-minute runtime, starting slow and melodic and gradually increasing the speed, fire, and intensity with some lovely and tasteful natural minor and E Dorian scale runs and licks. Despite his young age at the time, he was definitely focused, in the zone, and absolutely fearless when he put down this solo. An absolute masterpiece of early metal soloing, and a blast to play, I must say. And that's all I got to say about Michael Schenker and that one. I hope you liked it. That is a classic solo for sure, and very underrated. Hope you're well in your little guitar corner of the world, and we will see you next time. Cheers. Take care of yourselves.